It's the morning of May the 27th, 1942, and 200 tanks and 10,000 support vehicles find themselves under fire in the Libyan Desert. German General Erwin Rommel has assembled this massive armoured fist, which is racing forward trying to outflank the British Army's defensive line at Gazala. The radio crackles with situation reports as the leading vehicles of his 15th Panzer Division start firing back at the British. In a Panzer III, Hauptmann Johannes Kümmel leads the fight back and quickly manages to identify the enemy vehicles as M3 Stuart light tanks. At this range, their 37mm guns aren't accurate and can't penetrate the Panzer III's armour. Kümmel barks orders into his throat microphone and the battalion quickly arranges itself into attack formation. Half of his unit halts and lets off a barrage of shells from their 50mm guns. As the shells streak towards the enemy, the other half of the battalion roars forward across the sand. Then they switch roles, firing again and advancing forward. Just like the British, the German fire is still inaccurate, but the Panzers are rapidly closing the distance while the British tanks are stuck in place. Soon, Kümmel's battalion is within effective range of the enemy, and his gunner lines up a Stuart tank in his sights. The loader shoves a 50mm round into the tank's breech and calls up to Kümmel. Kümmel gives a firing command, and the gunner pulls the trigger to fire the main cannon. The shell slices through the desert air before smashing straight into a Stuart tank and cooks off the ammunition, sending the small tank exploding in a roaring fireball. Over on the British side, Lieutenant Bill Close is fighting against the overwhelming German force. All around him, Stuart tanks are being knocked out by enemy fire. He and his fellow desert rats from the 4th Armoured Brigade were already outnumbered 5-1 by the German tanks, and now those odds just keep getting worse. They've got to keep firing back. Reinforcements should be on their way. Close shouts to his crew to load armor-piercing ammunition.
Load armor-piercing! Target's 1,200 yards, 12 o'clock.
Down below, the loader pulls a 37mm round from storage and shoves it home into the breech. The gunner gets a Panzer III lined up in his sights. Close gives the order to fire, and the gunner squeezes the hand trigger, sending the round towards the Panzer. It strikes the German tank's front plate, kicking up a huge fountain of sparks. But Close and his crew are disappointed to see that the round has bounced straight off. The Panzer keeps advancing as if nothing has happened. Over on the German side, Rommel stays close to the action as the battle progresses. As commander of the entire Panzerarmee Afrika, he should stay well behind the front lines in a headquarters tent. But Rommel is rather up front with the men, seeing the battle play out before his own eyes. He looks through his binoculars and sees British tank after British tank go up in flames. Map in hand, he gives orders to his radio man, urging the German units to keep pressing forward. If they can just break through the British forces here, there's nothing but empty desert all the way to the vital Allied port at Tobruk.
Ausgezeichnet. Heya Safari.
Kümmel confidently leads his tank forwards, certain that the British lines are on the verge of collapse. But then, he's swamped by an enormous blast as one of the Panzer IIIs close to him is hit and explodes. Kümmel can't believe what he's seeing as the German crew scramble to escape the burning tank. It wasn't a mine, and it wasn't artillery. This was an enemy tank. Kümmel desperately scans the British lines to try and get a look at what on earth could have knocked out a brand new up-armoured Panzer III. Then, he sees it. In between the tiny Stuart tanks, a series of much larger tanks have taken up position. The huge vehicles are American-made M3 Grant tanks, armed with 75mm guns that can punch right through a Panzer III. Kümmel hurriedly orders his gunner to target the nearest tank.
Schwerer Panzer, 1000 Meter, 12 Uhr.
The gunner gets the huge British vehicle positioned in his sights.
Fire!
The round hurtles towards a Grant and smashes into its thick frontal armour, but the shell bounces right off. Kümmel instantly orders another shot. The Panzer's shell flies again to the target. Once more, it just pings away. Return fire comes immediately. A massive 75mm shell punches into the front armour of another Panzer III, sending it up in flames. Kümmel's mind races. He immediately activates his radio and calls up the chain of command. He needs fire support, or his panzers could be immediately wiped out. A radio message arrives at Rommel's half-track. He has no idea that the British had Grant tanks in this sector. Their appearance could throw his entire plan into jeopardy. Rommel orders his aide to call up the motorized artillery regiment. But the radio brings terrible news. The artillery is still trying to catch up. They're too far away to provide fire support. A more cautious commander would likely call off the attack. But Rommel's been in this situation before.
Die Flak-Batterie nach vorn.
Within moments, a team of 4 half-tracks rushes up from the rear, each towing an enormous 88mm flak gun. The massive weapon was designed to shoot down Allied bombers, but it can also rip through enemy tanks. The vehicles screech to a halt, kicking up a cloud of dust. Jumping down from the rear, the soldiers quickly spring into action. Unhooking the guns from the trailers, they disconnect the transport wheels. An explosion rocks the German gun crews.
Wir werden beschossen! Runter!
The British Grant tanks have spotted them and are already sending high-explosive 75mm rounds towards their position. The Grants are struggling at this range, and their shots land scattered around the guns. But soon, a round manages to find a way to its target and smashes directly into one of the 88mm guns. Smoke and flames rise from the devastated weapon. The German flak artillerymen drop down to the sand as shrapnel rains down upon them. Rommel wastes no time and runs over to one of the surviving guns and helps haul down a steel outrigger from the side. Inspired by his example, the German troops jump up and return to their work and soon have the guns ready.
Schaltet die Schweren aus!
The loader heaves the 88mm armor-piercing shell onto the breech of the gun. The gun commander identifies his target and shouts out the targeting information to the gunner.
Stop! Fire!
The 88 roars and the high-velocity shell streaks across the battlefield and right through the frontal armor of the Grant tank. The big British tank explodes at a fireball, sending shards of metal flying through the air.
Weiter feuern!
The German gunnery teams work like clockwork as they load and aim their massive guns. The 88s fire off their deadly shells, cutting through the desert air. Then the spent cases fly backwards, leaving a massive pile of hot steel in the sand. One by one, huge columns of smoke and flames rise into the sky as the British tanks go up in flames. Because of the power of the 88mm guns, the German tanks can start their advance again.
Panzer, vorwärts!
Befehl erhalten! Alle Panzer, Vormarsch fortsetzen!
At the front of the German force, Kümmel starts driving his battalion forward again with new urgency. The British lines are in disarray, and his tanks are soon closing in on the remaining enemy vehicles. Kümmel races against time, bringing his tank group onto the British flank to hit the enemy's armor from the weak side. The tanks leave behind streaming orange trails as they roar over the sand. The Grant tanks are pinned down facing forward, still trying to compete with the 88s. They don't see the danger moving around their flanks. Soon, Kümmel's battalion are in position. The large slab sides of the Grant tanks are visible through the haze.
Da, schwere Panzer an der Flanke. Panzergranate laden.
The loader slams around into the breach.
Fertig!
Kümmel's gunner brings the sights onto the side of the nearest Grant.
Fire!
The round streaks through the air and punches into the side of the British vehicle. Inevitably, flames burst up from the hull. The rest of Kümmel's battalion joins in, as the Grants turn themselves once more to face the Germans. The British tanks start returning fire, and a Panzer III goes up in a column of flames. But while they turn to face the new threat, the flak guns continue their barrage, and more 88 rounds come tearing into the Grants. The British tanks are trapped as vicious German fire pours in from the front and from the side. Soon, the British line begins to buckle, and Kümmel calls for his tanks to advance again. Just 100 yards behind the Grants, Lieutenant Bill Close watches the British line give way. He knows this will likely be his last stand. but still maneuvers his Stuart into position to meet the next German attack.
Target Mark III, 100 yards at the front.
Determined to keep fighting, he drops back down through the hatch. The loader slams home another round. The gunner quickly gets the German tank lined up.
On target.
Fire!
The Stuart's 37mm cracks and sends a round towards the nearest Panzer III. This time, the shell blasts through the German tank's armor. Smoke rises from the hatches and the German crews scramble from the tank. At this range, the Stuart finally has some bite. It's one Panzer down, but there are dozens more behind it. Close gets on his radio and tries to call for some artillery covering fire. But the response is negative. The British artillery isn't ready to fire. The Stuart tanks have to hold the line. There's a massive blast as yet another tank near Lieutenant Close takes a hit. The tank commander is killed instantly, and the rest of the crew struggle to bail out. Just as they drop down to the sand, machine gun fire thumps into the ground around them. The Germans are trying to pick off the survivors. Their only hope is Lieutenant Close and his tank. They frantically call over to him, and Close orders his driver to move the Stuart over. The tank rumbles closer to the survivors, and Close uses the commander's hatch as cover while he peeks out to direct the rescue. Just 100 meters away, Johannes Kümmel spots Close's Stuart tank. He can see Close giving orders from the turret. An enemy commander is always a valuable target, and Kümmel makes a quick decision to take out the Stuart.
Ziel voraus, M3 100 Meter. Kommandant aus der Luke.
The Panzer III's cannon thunders and the round streaks towards Close's tank. The shell strikes the frontal armor of the Stuart, and the tank starts smoking.
Guter Treffer.
Close's tank is riddled with shrapnel and is completely immobilized. The driver is hit with shrapnel in the shoulder, but the rest of the crew survive unscathed.
Move!
Close orders them to bail out and then hauls himself out of his hatch before dropping down onto the scorching hot engine compartment. The metal hull is hot enough to fry an egg, and Close quickly jumps down to take cover behind the tank. The rest of his crew evacuate as quickly as possible. They keep their heads down out of the incoming fire. Behind the battle, Rommel is still with the mighty 88mm guns as they continue their lethal work. The radio crackles into life over the crescendo of firing. With the latest report from Kümmel, the Afrika Korps has smashed through the British lines.
Wir haben die englischen Linien durchbrochen.
Rommel listens to the radio message with satisfaction. His decision has paid off. Now, the Desert Fox wants to be exactly where the action is.
Bringt uns nach vorn!
The half-track roars off across the desert towards the gunfire and explosions. In a desperate last stand on the British lines, Bill Close has managed to commandeer a tank from another crew in his unit. He and his crewmen clamber aboard their new Stuart and take the tank forward into battle as rounds whiz past all around. The enemy is almost on top of them.
Mark III, 12 o'clock, 200 yards.
The gunner trains the gun on the target.
On target.
Fire!
The round smashes into the Panzer III's armor. It's a direct hit, and the crew abandon the burning tank as it's still moving forward. Close scans the battlefield. The German panzers are closing in from the front and from the side. Another round slams into a Stuart next to Close, setting it ablaze. The enemy has totally outflanked the British, and their position is now hopeless.
Pull back, all tanks,
The
pull
British
back.
tank force start to roll back across the desert sand, and then go into full retreat. Just a few hundred yards away, Johannes Kümmel knows he's got to press home the attack. His tanks have suffered from the big guns of the Grants and the fierce resistance of the little Stuart tanks. But even with just 1/3 of their number remaining, they're strong enough to take out the remaining enemy tanks. His tank battalion keeps advancing. They push through the burning British hulls and maintain a steady rain of fire towards the retreating survivors. More British tanks go up in flames, and it looks like it's going to be a complete rout of the enemy. But it's then that the battlefield erupts with deep booms as clouds of dust and shrapnel burst around the Panzers. From 10 kilometers away, the British have finally organized their field artillery and have directed it towards the battlefield. Kümmel braces himself against the onslaught as 25-pounder rounds smash down into the German tank formations. A Panzer III takes a direct hit, and belches black smoke while the crew dive out of the hatches. Kümmel is devastated, but he knows it's not worth the risk to keep advancing into the accurate artillery barrage.
Halt! Halt! Wir können nicht weiter.
The British artillery has saved Close and the last survivors from being wiped out, but it has not saved the battle. The desert is filled with burning British tanks. Kümmel's panzers have punched through the British armoured force and sent it into full retreat. Rommel's half-track pulls up to the front line as the British artillery fades. The Grant tanks and the artillery have taken a toll, and dozens of German tanks too lie wrecked in the sand. But the losses were worth it. The Desert Fox surveys the battlefield with pride for the efforts of his men. Pressing forward against the heavy Grant tanks was a risk, but it has paid off. The way to Tobruk is now open. In less than a month, Rommel captured the Allied fortress at the port of Tobruk. For this, he was promoted to Field Marshal. Johannes Kümmel continued fighting in North Africa and Italy, earning the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross. He was killed in a car accident near Anzio in 1944. Bill Close was awarded the Military Cross for his actions at Gazala. He survived the war and died aged 91 in 2006.
Click here if you like this film and want to see another incredible tank battle.